Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
Every December, like clockwork, we all showed up for the same polished performance, the Christmas Eve gathering at my parents' house in the kind of suburban cul-de-sac where everyone trims their hedges just enough to pretend they're not silently competing. The driveway was lined with perfectly parked SUVs, a minivan or two, and my car, a silver '09 Corolla with a dent in the rear bumper that seemed to glow under their porch lights like a beacon of failure. I parked last, as usual, and sat there for a minute, staring at the wreath on the front door like it might sprout teeth and bite. Inside, I could already hear the laughter, that high-pitched, performative kind that means nothing. The kind that floats up from martinis and passive aggression, carried by the scent of honey-glazed ham and overpriced cologne. I took a breath, counted to 5, and walked in like I hadn't thought about turning around twice already. My mom opened the door wearing her Christmas apron, you know the one, with embroidered candy canes and a ribbon that reads "Love Lives Here." She kissed my cheek too fast, like she was checking a box, and said, "Claire, sweetie, you made it. We were starting to worry you'd gotten lost." The joke being, I've lived in the same city for 16 years. Greg was already on his second glass of whiskey, laughing too loudly at something Rachel had said. He always laughed at Rachel's jokes like he owed her something, which, considering I'd paid off part of his gambling debt 2 years ago, might be true. Rachel looked perfect as always, a red lips, no smudge, pearls from our grandmother that she only wore to these kinds of events, the kind of outfit that says I'm thriving even when your checking account says otherwise. She kissed the air near my cheek and whispered, "Love the car, Claire." Still rocking the vintage vibe. I didn't respond. I just smiled, the way you smile when you're trying not to bite your tongue hard enough to draw blood. Dad was standing near the fireplace, drink in hand, wearing a cardigan like he was auditioning for a retirement ad. He nodded at me, and I nodded back. We had that kind of relationship, half nods and full silences. I used to think that was just how dads were until I saw him light up around Greg. We gathered in the living room where the tree stood too tall for the ceiling, decked out in coordinated gold and burgundy ornaments, the whole thing a Hallmark wet dream. Rachel had picked the color scheme this year, and of course, no one asked if we liked it. Mom handed me a flute of champagne, like I drink champagne. I asked for water instead, and she gave me the kind of look people give stray dogs who bark too loud. We did the same song and dance we do every year, small talk about traffic, weather, how expensive groceries have gotten, how some people don't know the value of $1 these days. It was Greg who brought up housing prices, bragging about how his investment condo had appreciated by 10%. Rachel chimed in with something about interior design and the challenges of hiring good help these days. I didn't say anything, because if I had, I might have pointed out that Greg's condo is in foreclosure proceedings and Rachel's last client left a Yelp review that could peel paint off walls. I sat through it all, smiling and nodding like I wasn't mentally calculating how much I had left in my checking account after paying their phone bill last week. They never asked me to. They never said thank you either. It started 5 years ago, after Dad's lawsuit, an ugly thing involving an old business partner and some misfiled tax documents. He lost, quietly. The kind of quiet that gets paid for with checks that bounce and mail that goes unopened. That Christmas, I'd arrived a little early and seen the stack on the counter, pink slips from the gas company, a water shutoff notice, and something from the credit union I knew too well. I didn't ask questions. I just made a few calls and paid what I could. I thought, this is what family does. No one ever mentioned those notices again. No one ever asked how the lights stayed on. They just assumed. And the thing about assumptions? They rot. Slowly, quietly. Like the water damage you never see until the ceiling caves in. After dinner, we did gifts. Rachel passed hers out first, fancy candles, monogrammed wallets, tiny bottles of perfume wrapped in gold tissue paper. Greg gave out gift cards, claiming it's more practical in this economy, even though the cards had his law firm's logo on them, which felt sad. I handed out my presents last, homemade jams and hand-knit scarves, the kind of stuff people pretend to like because they think it makes you feel better. It doesn't. I know what they think when they unwrap them. Poor Claire. She tries. Then Dad stood up. He had a small box in his hand, maybe the size of a mug. He smiled the way politicians smile when they're about to say something that's going to piss you off. This, he said, is for someone who needs to learn to stand on her own 2 feet. He handed me the box with a wink. Rachel laughed. Greg grinned. Mom looked away. And I smiled. The kind of smile you give when someone pushes just hard enough that they finally trip over the line they didn't know was drawn in stone. Inside that smile, there was something growing. Something patient. Cold. Sharp. And it had been waiting a long, long time. It's funny how people define the word support, as if it always means helping someone stand taller, as if it never means placing just enough weight on their shoulders to keep them from standing at all. My parents have always claimed they supported me emotionally, financially, morally, all the ways people like to believe they're the heroes of their own family story. But the truth is uglier than any holiday centerpiece or photo collage on the mantle. They didn't support me. They leaned on me, hollowed me out piece by piece, and then told their friends I was figuring things out like I was some college dropout living on microwave noodles and dreams. I never corrected them. Not once. Because what would be the point? People don't believe the daughter in the $10 Target dress when the mom is wearing pearls and quoting scripture at the dinner table. People don't listen to the one who drives up in a car that sounds like a dying lawnmower. And people sure as hell don't want to believe the child they quietly pity is the same one keeping their air conditioning running and their Amazon Prime account active. That doesn't fit the story they've decided to tell. Greg, the oldest, was always the golden one, tall, charming, the kind of guy who looked good in khakis and used cologne like punctuation. He became a dentist straight out of grad school, married a blonde named Natalie who smiled with all teeth and no soul, and bought a 3-bedroom house with a pool he can't afford to maintain. What no one says out loud ever is that Greg has a problem with cards. Not the kind you send on birthdays, the kind you swipe across velvet tables in dark rooms when you think no one's watching. He's buried in debt so deep he once joked he'd have to sell a kidney to climb out. I laughed at the time, even though I was the one who wired him $3,000 after his bank account was frozen. I didn't tell anyone. Not even him. I made it look like it came from his business partner. Rachel, on the other hand, is a hurricane in silk. She hasn't held a job in almost 7 years, unless you count brand ambassadorships for collagen water and posting curated photos of her houseplants on Instagram. She still lives in the guest house behind Mom and Dad's place, though they call it the studio to make it sound like she's some kind of artist in residence. She says she's working on a screenplay. She's been saying that since Obama was in office. But to everyone else, she's free-spirited and brilliant. Me? I'm the one who could have done so much more if only I'd applied myself. Which is hilarious when you consider the number of late bills I've paid on behalf of the people supposedly doing better than me. I remember one day, about 4 years ago, when Mom called me sounding frantic. She said her car wouldn't start, that the repair shop quoted her almost $1,000, and that she hated to ask. Really, she did. But could I help? Of course I said yes. I always said yes. I pulled the last $1,000 from my savings, even though, if I'm being totally honest, I only had about $800 in the account. Yeah, math isn't my strong suit, or maybe I just wanted to believe I could afford it. That mistake cost me an overdraft fee and 2 weeks of ramen dinners. But the worst part? A month later, I found out the car was never in the shop. That repair money went to her Botox appointment. She even joked about it at brunch, right in front of Rachel, like it was nothing. Like it was her right. I didn't say anything then either. Just smiled and drank my mimosa like I wasn't screaming inside. That's what you do when you're the family sponge. You soak it up. All the lies, all the disappointments, all the moments when people look at you with that pity-laced condescension, assuming you're the one who can't get it together. When in truth, You're the glue holding their whole rickety mess of a family together with nothing but duct tape and diminishing patience. And the thing that always kills me is this: no matter how much I gave, it was never seen as giving. Not really. Because I didn't package it in a bow or announce it on Facebook or hand it over during a group prayer. I didn't make a show of it. And in this family, if you don't make a show of it, it didn't happen. Silent sacrifices don't count unless someone claps at the end. So I let them believe what they needed to believe. I let them talk about me like I was some struggling charity case. I let Dad walk around with that smug look, like every time I showed up for a holiday meal I was getting some kind of gift, like being allowed in their home was itself an act of generosity. I let him believe all of it, right up until the moment he turned to me that night, wine glass in one hand, that half-smile curling at the corner of his mouth, and said, "Claire, we can't support you forever, you know." And I smiled back, the same way a fuse might smile before it burns down into the dynamite. There are certain moments in life when the air thickens, when every sound in the room becomes a distant hum, and your heartbeat grows so loud it drowns out everything but the look on someone's face just before their world shifts a little off its axis. That moment came for my family the second I leaned back in my chair, wiped the smirk off my lips, and said, in the calmest voice I could muster, "Actually, Dad, I brought something for you too." The way the room snapped to attention was almost comical. Greg set his glass down without blinking, Rachel straightened her back like she was bracing for gossip, and my mother clutched the arm of the couch with those manicured hands that never touched a dirty dish. I reached into my tote bag, cheap canvas, frayed at the seams, but tougher than any of them ever gave it credit for, and pulled out a plain, navy blue folder. No gift wrap, no bow, no festive ribbon. Just a thick, overstuffed folder held closed with a rubber band stretched tight from the pressure of too many pages jammed inside. I placed it in my father's lap with a single sentence, "Since you're concerned about support, I figured we should have a conversation based on facts." For a few seconds, no one moved. Dad looked down at it like it might bite him, like it was something unclean or suspicious or beneath his dignity. Then, with the same slow, calculated movements he used when slicing ham or correcting one of my life choices, he peeled off the rubber band and opened it. The first page, an electric bill from 5 years ago marked final notice in bold red ink, greeted him like a ghost from the attic. He turned the page. Then another. Then another. His eyebrows began to sink. His mouth opened just slightly, but no sound came out. His hand trembled, only a little, but enough that Rachel finally leaned over and whispered, "What is that?" I didn't answer. I wanted the pages to speak for me. Water bills I paid in cash because they couldn't face the embarrassment of a bounce check. Gas service reconnection notices with meter readings so low it meant they'd gone weeks without heat during winter. Credit card minimums missed for 3 months straight, then 4. 2 separate collection agency threats with their names spelled in all caps and bold letters. The real piece de resistance was about halfway in a foreclosure notice for the house we were currently sitting in, dated 2 years ago, intercepted only because I made a phone call posing as my mother and wired a payment I couldn't afford, then worked overtime for months just to stay afloat. My mother's wine glass clinked against the coffee table, a tiny nervous twitch in an otherwise eerily frozen expression. She looked like she wanted to say something, like she was searching for the proper words to downplay or distract or deny, but nothing came out. Greg leaned forward, then chuckled softly, and when I caught his eye, I saw something unsettling there, not shock, not gratitude, but recognition. Like he'd known, or at least suspected, and never said a damn thing. Rachel stared at me like I'd just taken off a mask she didn't know I was wearing. She opened her mouth, closed it, then turned to our father. "Is this real?" she asked, her voice suddenly higher, thinner, like a cracked teacup trying to hold boiling water. Dad didn't answer her. He just kept flipping pages, one after another. Fast now. Like maybe if he turned them quickly enough, they'd disappear. When he hit the last one, a printout of the online banking transfer I'd made to pay off the second mortgage. They all saw my name at the bottom, next to the bank's timestamp and the loan number in bold. That was the moment I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Not shame, not sorrow, just a quiet, desperate sort of disbelief. The kind that comes when the illusion finally dies. He looked up at me slowly, like he was trying to figure out what version of me he'd been talking to all these years. The failure? The freeloader? The disappointing daughter who couldn't keep a steady relationship or buy a house or make something of herself. Because the version sitting in front of him now had just rewritten 5 years of history with nothing but a manila folder and a smile. Finally, he spoke. Just one question. Why would you even keep all this? I stared right at him. My voice didn't waver. My hands didn't shake. I didn't blink. So you'd have something to read when the lights go out. The silence in the room didn't last long, because silence never really survives in families like mine. Someone always has to say something, fill the air with noise so they don't have to hear what's actually being said beneath the surface. It was Greg who broke first, not with words, but with motion, standing up a little too fast and muttering something about needing a smoke, even though he quit years ago. He didn't look at me as he walked out, just grabbed his coat and disappeared into the cold night like he was chasing an excuse he didn't have to explain. Rachel, of course, took it as her cue to flip the script. She crossed her legs the way women do when they're about to throw verbal daggers wrapped in politeness, then said, in a tone so sweet it made my teeth ache, "Claire, what exactly are you trying to accomplish with all this? Seriously, you're embarrassing the family. This is Christmas, not a therapy session." She tossed her hair and glanced at our mother, who was already dabbing at her eyes with a napkin like she'd just watched a puppy get kicked on live television. "I mean, Mom's crying," Rachel added, as if her observation was some kind of moral compass. Mom didn't speak at first. She just stared at me like I'd grown horns, like I was the one who'd broken something sacred, instead of the one who'd been patching their financial messes with my own life for half a decade. Then finally, she choked out a sentence so familiar it could have been carved on her tombstone. "You didn't have to do any of that, Claire. You could have just talked to us. You didn't have to be cruel." Cruel. That was the word she used. Not honest, not fed up, not desperate after years of being invisible, but cruel. As if telling the truth was some kind of betrayal, as if lifting the veil was more damaging than letting them continue to believe the lie. I could have laughed if it didn't hurt so much. I could have screamed if I thought it would have made a dent. But instead, I stood there quietly, letting their outrage pour over me like lukewarm water. It didn't burn anymore. It barely registered. Because what none of them knew, what none of them cared to know, was how many times I'd chosen them over myself. How many rent payments I'd skipped to wire money before shut-off notices became lockouts. How many nights I stayed awake refreshing bank apps, praying an auto draft wouldn't bounce. I'd canceled therapy to afford their groceries. Skipped dentist appointments so they wouldn't lose their internet. I hadn't taken a proper vacation since 2016, and even then, I spent half the trip on the phone with a collections department pretending to be my father. I walked outside then, not because I needed air, but because I needed to put a wall between their outrage and my dignity. The night was cold enough to slap the nerves awake in my face. The sky was clear, so damn clear, and I remember thinking how unfair it was that the stars got to shine above a house like that, a house built on appearances and denial and 1,000 little lies that no one wanted to acknowledge. I leaned against the railing of the porch, hands shoved deep in my coat pockets, and remembered the exact moment I started keeping records. It was 3 years ago, January. I had just wired them $600 to cover a water bill marked Final Disconnection Notice. That same afternoon, I got a voicemail from my father, his voice cold, clipped, calculated, saying he was worried I'd become a parasite, that I was relying too much on them emotionally and needed to figure out how to carry my own weight. He had no idea I had carried their weight for months by then. No idea I had paid their phone bill that week. No idea I was behind on my own rent. I replayed that voicemail 5 times, each time thinking maybe I'd misheard. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he didn't mean it. But he did. Of course he did. That was when I decided to stop erasing the evidence. I stopped covering my tracks. I started printing receipts, saving emails, logging every transaction like I was preparing for an audit no one thought would ever come. I wasn't building a case then. I was building a life raft for when the guilt finally stopped working. Back inside, the room felt tighter, denser, like the air had turned to syrup. No one said a word when I walked in. Rachel wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom just stared at her lap. And Dad, he sat with the folder closed now, like the pages inside were radioactive. I reached into the back of the folder, pulled out the last sheet, and held it up for all of them to see. It was clean, crisp, uncreased. My resignation letter. I've been working, I said, slowly, clearly, enunciating every word like I was teaching them a new language. At the bank. You know, the one you told everyone let me go 5 years ago. Dad blinked, confused, then narrowed his eyes. You said, I let you think I was fired. I cut him off. Because it made you feel more comfortable. Because if I was struggling, it meant your failure to help didn't look like failure. It looked like parenting. The words dropped like bricks. No one moved. I folded the letter and slid it back into the folder. I'm not poor, I added, leveling my gaze at all of them. I just stopped buying things to make you feel comfortable. They say silence speaks volumes, but no one ever tells you just how deafening it becomes when the people who spent their entire lives talking over you suddenly don't know what to say. That was the feeling hanging in the living room like smoke after a kitchen fire, sour, clinging, impossible to ignore. No one touched their wine glasses. The music had long since stopped. The tree lights blinked in slow, tired rhythm like they too were exhausted by all the pretending. And still, I sat there, hands folded neatly in my lap, waiting for someone to acknowledge what had just happened. They didn't. Of course they didn't. So I stood, not with drama or a raised voice, but with the calm finality of someone who has already moved past anger and into something much colder, more honest. I walked toward the tree where the rest of the gifts were stacked, gleaming paper, ribbons, name tags written in my mother's perfect cursive. I picked up 3 boxes, 1 envelope, and a small, rectangular mirror wrapped in brown paper. These weren't stocking stuffers or trinkets from a discount bin. These were carefully selected truths. And this time, they came with names on them. Greg, I said, and he looked up like a child caught mid-lie. This one's for you. I handed him the first box. His hands hesitated before taking it, as if the cardboard might burn. Inside, he found a reprint of every single transaction from his online gambling account that had been flagged by his bank 2 years ago, the ones he'd claimed were fraud, the ones I'd quietly paid to keep him from getting reported. I'd attached a sticky note to the top page that read, "You were always better at pulling teeth than keeping secrets." His face went pale, then red, then blank. I didn't stay long enough to watch the shame settle. Instead, I turned to Rachel, who was already shaking her head before I even opened my mouth. Don't bother, she said, crossing her arms. I don't want whatever game you're playing. But I handed her the envelope anyway, the kind that comes certified with an official stamp in the corner. Inside, she found a copy of the unemployment fraud settlement she paid last year, the one she told everyone was a clerical error. What she didn't know, or maybe never cared to ask, was that the anonymous donor who covered the fine was me. I'd even arranged the payment through a third-party firm to avoid suspicion. Rachel didn't open the envelope fully, just stared at the edge of it like it might reveal something on its own. Why? She whispered, more to herself than me. I shrugged. Because you were drowning. And I'm not a monster. Just tired of being the life raft nobody notices. Then came my mother's turn. I handed her the last wrapped item, a mirror, antique, the kind you hang in a hallway where the light catches it in strange ways. No note. No explanation. Just her own reflection staring back at her. For a moment, she looked almost hurt, but it passed quickly, replaced by that familiar mask of genteel fragility. You've made your point. Claire, she said softly, but I don't understand what you want from us anymore. And that was the thing she never had. She never understood that sometimes people don't want apologies or redemption or a dramatic reunion around the fireplace. Sometimes they just want peace. Not the kind you get from wine or prayer or good lighting, but the kind that comes from letting go of a weight you were never meant to carry. I returned to the couch and pulled out one final envelope, this one unmarked, sealed with a simple piece of tape. I held it in my hand for a moment before speaking. "This one's not for any of you," I said. "It's for me." I placed it on the coffee table and stepped back. Inside that envelope was my goodbye, a letter explaining that I'd sold my apartment, paid off my last debt, and was moving out of state within the week. No forwarding address. No phone number. No more late-night calls or surprise requests or guilt-wrapped expectations disguised as love. I was done. Not angry. Just done. But I didn't leave. Not right away. I stayed for dessert. Watched them move stiffly through the rest of the evening like actors in a play that had already been canceled. Rachel pretended to enjoy the pie. Greg disappeared again. My mom kept wiping the same clean spot on the counter. Dad sat like a man reviewing damage he still refused to believe was his fault. And I just watched. When the plates were cleared and the tension had dulled into background noise, I stood once more and walked over to the folder still sitting on the side table. I flipped to the very last page, the one no one had noticed yet. It was folded differently, cleaner, like it had been added more recently. I pulled it out slowly, deliberately, and held it up. It was a deed transfer form. Their house, my childhood home, was nearly lost 2 years ago after Dad missed several mortgage payments and ignored the calls from the bank. I'd stepped in quietly, negotiated with the lender, and arranged a delayed payment plan. I hadn't told anyone. I even held onto the final step, the document that would officially release them from foreclosure and place temporary ownership under my name for protection. I was going to sign this, I said, my voice flat but steady, until Dad said I needed to grow up. The room went quiet again, but this time it didn't feel like a performance. It felt like the final note in a song none of them knew they'd been hearing until now. I folded the form and slid it back into the folder without another word. And just like that, the storm passed, not because it was over, but because it had said everything it needed to say.